The 18th Heads of States and Government Summit of the Group of 20, that's the G20, will take place in New Delhi, India. Well, this week, the G20 will bring together the world's major and systematically important economies. Its members represent 85% of the global domestic product, that's the GDP. 75% of the international trade and even more than 60% of the world's population. Well, this edition will focus on the theme of the G20. It is One Earth, One Family, One Future. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu will be attending and has said that he has a goal of attracting more foreign investments to Nigeria. Well, tonight, Babajide, the founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is here to share more insight about the opportunities for Nigeria at the G20 summit. Hello, Babajide.
Good evening, Anna.
Yes, so we know Nigeria is not a member of the G20, but how significant is this event for the country?
So first, there's how should we describe the G20? It's, picture a restaurant. It's what I would say the G20 is an economic buffet for friends. And because you will also have a lot of enemies at the G20, it's like an a la carte for enemies. So the G20 is a collection in a meeting where you will have lots of friends and indeed lots of enemies. For Nigeria, yes, we are not part of the G20. There's some good news and there's some bad news. And the good news is the G20 represents the world's financial cabal. In that group, you have the UK, United Kingdom, the United States. In that group, you have Japan, you have Saudi Arabia. They will be playing key roles at this summit in India. The bad news as well is you have those countries that they refer to, in other words, as enemies, also at the G20. China, Korea, Russia will also be at the G20. So in summary, Anne, if you followed the historic meeting of all the presidents that have been attending the G20 since 2008, one thing is guaranteed for Nigeria, which is also guaranteed for every country that attends the G20. You will make new friends, is guaranteed. You will also, because you've made new friends, you will make new enemies. So that sets the tone for what exactly Nigeria, what will happen to the president when he leaves the G20 in India. He will go with some old friends, but it's guaranteed that President Tinubu will leave with new friends and with new enemies. Let's take a look at why I talk about friends and enemies and the politics behind the G20. Yes, the G20, 19 countries, including the European Union, but here's why Africa's role is significant in some perspective and insignificant. If you take a look at what's in front of us, what you will notice is Africa is the continent that is least represented at the G20. Only South Africa, among all African countries, is represented at the G20. If you look at all the other continents, you see high concentration of countries and representation across it. And so the question is, how significant will be the discussions that Africa and the proposals that will be presented by Africa, taken by other nations, looking at our concentration and the perception of Africa in the G20. So the summary is, for Africa, what we say will be as important as what we choose not to say, because clearly from what we see, the distribution and the focus of the G20 over the years hasn't really been about equity or fairness, because if it's about equity or fairness, we will have seen more representation from African countries. What the G20 really is all about is how powerful are you?
But every year, I mean, we know the leadership of the G20 changes. This year, it's going on in India. What are the global priorities for India in all of this?
So, yes, India this year. Next year should be Brazil. And then from Brazil, we'll then see the next summit in 2025 will be in South Africa. But since it's India, the first is to look at what are the priorities for the G20 under India's leadership. And if you take a look at what India has said will be its top priorities, they are similar to the priorities of other previous years, again, just in different words. India has said green development, in simple terms, trying to lower carbon footprint. It's talked about improving climate finance and making sure lifestyle for the environment becomes one of its top priorities, priority one. India has also talked about ensuring that low-income countries and emerging economies have more opportunities for growth and also have more stakes at the discussion tables. Point 3, India has talked about accelerating the progress for sustainable development goals, again, because we know that the World Trade Organization will also be at this summit. We also know that the International Monetary Fund and all the other financial institutions will be at this summit. So sustaining SDG goals, important for the G20 under India. Clearly, the role of technology is a priority for India and digital public infrastructure. That's where we have the financial technology space and artificial intelligence coming up. So again, key priorities for India. And finally, the politics of it, improving multilateral institutions for the 21st century. So these are the priorities for India. These have also been the priorities of other countries that have hosted the G20, albeit put in other words. And so sometimes people talk about the G20 being a place where a lot happens, but nothing happens.
All right, but going to this summit, I mean, attracting more foreign direct investments is key to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's agenda, as he has said. What is the situation for foreign investment in Nigeria, and what countries are up on top of their game talking about this type of thing?
So going into the summit, and I think the president has said it's clear his agenda will be attracting foreign direct investment. Should that be his agenda? I think yes. So I think on this, the president has gotten it right. Nigeria clearly needs more foreign direct investment. And because if you look at prior to these summits, a lot of people have referred to Nigeria as G0. And what do they mean by G0? And that's because people talk about Nigeria is the giant of Africa. However, Nigeria is in manufacturing. And I would like you to take a detailed example, listen to what I'm about to share with you. Last year, the National Bureau of Statistics released a report that showed that Nigeria exported 26 trillion naira. Now, 26 trillion naira sounds like a lot of money. However, less than 3% of this was manufactured goods. Less than 3% of Nigeria's exports, manufactured goods. But that isn't the bad news. The bad news is that less than half of these manufactured goods get outside Africa. In other words, the world is not feeling manufacturing coming from Nigeria. Manufacturing, again, I explained, accounts for less than 3% of Nigeria's total exports. And even though manufacturing accounts for less than 3% of total exports, majority of Nigeria's manufactured exports stays within Africa. And so those are the reasons why the world looks at the giant of Africa and says it is a sleeping giant. So what the president has said, is it the right thing? Yes, we need to attract more investments. Not only attract more investments, we need to attract more investments into Nigeria's manufacturing sector. Again, let's look at the numbers so that the president can have a clearer picture of the challenges and the opportunities. Excuse me. Since 2015, total capital imported into Nigeria, $89 billion. However, just about 10 countries accounts for 90% of all capital that comes into the country. The United Kingdom and the United States. Since 2015, they've accounted for approximately $50 billion worth of capital. Again, these are still the top 2 countries Nigeria gets its capital from. South Africa, Netherlands, Singapore, the UAE, Mauritius because of the safe haven for capital, Belgium, Switzerland, and France. The summary is President Tinubu going into the G20 summit has 2 options. Option 1, does it stick with these countries that have historically provided capital to Nigeria, the ones in front of us, United Kingdom, United States? Or does it go with new friends again, over time, what we have seen is the monies coming in from these historical countries have been insufficient to support Nigeria's manufacturing sector. Again, it has two options. Do we go with history or we make new friends? In the final analysis, one thing is guaranteed. President Tinubu will leave G20 with new friends and new enemies. That is for certain.
All right, I guess that's a good place to end it. Babajide Ogunsowo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you for it.